All right. So assignments, reminder, assignments due one today, night, and the other one Saturday. Right? And then when those are, when those times have passed, I'll release the grades. Okay? Refer back to those when you're studying. Final exams Monday. If you do, here. All right, and then today is at-home video left. Give you a little bit of a break. Okay. So the plan is to continue on with flower groups today, and hopefully I'll cover most of that today. That Thursday, both of the lecture session on Thursday could be for review. Okay. So that's the plan. So Thursday, come prepared to ask questions. I'm not going to just sit here on Thursday and lecture at you. It'll be, give and take, ask questions. Okay. Flowers and fruits. We've been looking at pollination strategies, the idea of imperfect flowers versus perfect flowers. And remember then, if you are imperfect, you can be either monoecious, like corn, where you have imperfect flowers on the same plant. Or you can be dioecious, where you have a male plant with male flowers, you have a female plant with female flowers. And then the idea of if you are dioecious like that, where you have two houses, male and separate female, then you have to do that crossbreeding or outbreeding idea. If you're like corn, technically you could self-pollinate on the same plant. So in general, there's a lot of push for mixing up of the genes, get that crossbreeding rather than inbreeding for increased vigor and ability to withstand changes in your environment. So in general, it's a good idea to mix up your genes, get pollen from other sources, not the same plant where the egg is being held as well. And then we started looking at pollination strategies and how plants have co-evolved with their pollinators in order to attract the pollinator successfully. And so we've been looking at this idea. Here we're looking at how bees interpret flower color and design, very different from ours. And so what we see on the left is the purple with the light center. Bees see, white with a red center, and then they have those red stripes kind of leading into the center. So again, very flagrant here, come to the center. This is where the reward is, usually nectar. And so you can see that, next time you watch bees visiting flowers, appreciate that they're going to see it a little differently. And what we see is on the right, primarily just yellow flowers, they see a very different pattern. And so, again, this is an excellent example of coevolution, where the plant has co-evolved with the bee to really attract the bee, and the bee has been, visiting these flowers, rewarding that shift in, attracting them by coming along, depositing pollen, picking up pollen, going on to the next flower, and so on and so on. So really interesting. We see what's on the upper left. They see more of a purplish hue in this case. Here's another one. We see what's on the top left, with primarily just yellow, but bees see a very different pattern in color. So really kind of stunning in the differences based on how we have very different ways of visualizing compared to bees. So again, we see the yellow primarily, and they see the white and dramatic red center. So bees are incredibly important. I think we've all at least peripherally heard about colony collapse disorder. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. But when you look at, when we see a red flower, that's not really what they're seeing. And so they are not picking up on the red pigment like what our eyes do. And so they tend to zoom in on flowers that look blue to them or that look yellow to them. And again, remembering that it can look a little different to how our retina perceives color. And they liked, if common, that some of the flower petals or parts of the flower will be designed to handle the bee's weight, because bees can be quite robust. They can weigh a fair bit, and it's kind of amazing that they can fly around sometimes. And so having a fairly nice stalk, and then the flower stalk, and then having often a modified petal to help with the landing of the bee. And then just remember that they can perceive ultraviolet light. That's what makes the flowers look so different to them. We don't pick that up with our retina, whereas bees do. And then, of course, I think, I mentioned this more than once, we rely heavily on honeybees for our food production because they need to pollinate in order for the fruit to get made. And so, it's estimated about 1/3 of our nutrition is reliant on successful honeybee pollination. And so it's a lot different than it used to be in terms of how they get this to happen. They actually have huge semi-trucks of bees that they'll drive around the country and release the bees to do their pollination. And then they'll come back to their box hives, get loaded on the semi-truck, and off they go to the next site. So it's a very different operation than a more natural setting. But something that they need to do, and unfortunately a lot of the people involved in this process are finding that the bees are dying off in really high numbers, and have a lot of people really worried about the crashing population of bees. So here you can see again the flower is pretty robust. You have that central part is pretty tough. The stalks are fairly thick to handle the weight and have them crawling around, and so that's pretty common. Again, this is a flower that is often visited by bees. And then even this flower, it's usually bee pollination, and often you'll see the bees like stick their legs down, their front legs down, to sop up some of the nectar in the central portion. So here's another good example where you can see, especially like on the right, that flower kind of going directly out to you. That's kind of the landing platform idea that I was mentioning, where they can land on that section and it's strong. And then it's, it's kind of creating this nice opening for them to crawl into and get access to the nectar. And of course, as they're doing that, as they're searching for their reward, they're getting covered in pollen that will then get transferred to the next flower they go to visit. So pollen, if you've looked at bees carefully, they have very fuzzy bodies. Here's an excellent picture of an eye of a bee with dandelion pollen that's stuck all on its hairs. And so it can be quite successful strategy for the plant to just deposit the pollen grains, as the bee is brushing up against the anther, all those pollen grains get deposited. So again, I'm pretty sure you've heard at least a little bit about this idea of the bee populations crashing. And initially, when they started looking at this many years ago, they were trying to find like a certain thing, like one thing that's causing it. Now they think it's a variety of things, kind of like a perfect storm, many things weighing in on this. They were tracking, initially they thought it was just the parasitic mite, and those are still part of the problem, but they realize there's other problems that are coming to play a role in the collapsing of the bee populations. So you can see here where they were tracking mites showing up in the bee populations, you can see a definite decline. And right here, there's like a bump decline where you can see it's pretty dramatic compared to previous years. And so looking at this, I don't know if you can see from where you're sitting, but there's a mite on top of the bee there that's attached itself and hitching a ride and speeding off of the bee. And the poor thing. And so this is the Varroa destructor mite, and it weakens the bee. Doesn't necessarily kill it outright, but it certainly weakens it. Here's the underside of the mite that you're seeing. Ugh, bleh. And there's another picture of it. And so they can show that this mite has, you know, spread globally and is impacting honeybee population globally. And so that was like the first thing they were pointing at, and they were like putting the blame on the mite, which, you know, yes, it's a problem for sure. That's not the only thing that they think now is going on. So they're also tracking fungal pathogens and bacterial pathogens. And so they're realizing that that could also be playing a role. So what can happen is as the mite is feeding on the bee, that weakens them, stresses them, including their immune system. And then it's easier for the fungal and bacterial pathogens to start to gain a foothold on them. And so here they're tracking, in this case, it was a fungal outbreak. And so you can see they're tracking the spores, in this case, of the fungi, and you can see this increase over time. And then they're also saying, weighing into all of this is poor nutrition for the bees. So I think you can appreciate that if you are eating well and have a crappy diet, it's much easier for you to get sick, cold, or some virus that's, you know, lingering around. And it's the same for bees. If they have a poor nutritional profile, their immune system is going to be extra stressed. And so this is the idea I was talking about, where they, you know, drive semi trucks of these bee containers, and then they let them loose. But what do they go and eat? They eat pollen from our conventional cropping systems, which are mostly monocultures. So if you ate corn at the beginning of your life, that's all you ate. Kind of the same idea. If all they get is corn, that's all they ever get. That might not be such a good nutritional profile. So they're pointing to conventional agriculture as contributing to this problem, and that the bees aren't getting enough diversity in their diet, and that is weakening them. And then that allows the mite to get an upper hand, and then the fungal and bacterial pathogens. So it's just this bigger story than what they thought. And then another group of scientists said, but wait, there's more. And so now they're pointing to the pesticides that are being sprayed on plants, not to get rid of mites. Pesticides are to get rid of other insect pests, but the honeybees get impacted by it. And so in this case, I don't know if you've ever heard the term neonicotinoids. Neonicotinoids, that's a type of pesticide that's very, very potent. And unfortunately, the bees don't respond well to the presence of that. So if they're visiting plants that have been doused in this, and it's usually a foliar spray, then that's an extra issue. So it's a mess, really, and lots of moving parts to consider. It's going to take a lot of different scientists involved to try to solve this problem, and they are working on it, thankfully. But it is, I like this quote, that it requires investment and stewardship, that if we don't pay attention to this, we're going to be in a world of hurt. Yeah, they are looking at like, well, they're looking at like biocontrol methods, like what could take the mite, eat it essentially, or there's some fungi that actually spray like a fungal spore slurry. Like we do this in greenhouse. If we have insect pests in there, we can grow up this fungi and put it into the watering system, spray it, and then the fungi attack the insect body. Like they like that and so we'll just start attacking it, dissolving it, but leave the plants alone. So if you could think of something like that where we leave the honeybee alone and just, you know, attack. Right? And so they are looking at that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, but I don't know how you'd wrangle. You'd have to like anesthetize the colony, I would think, right? Get in there and do it. Yeah. Yeah. You gotta get used to them. You're like, Steve, does anyone say you have a club here in the area? Yeah. And I think there's a professor in chemistry, I think it's Dr. Chinelli, is working with at least one undergrad student on bee research and pollination strategies. I think they're actually kind of close to the field plot that we use for our botany research. They're in that area working. And so, but yeah, Marquette has like a bee club for anyone that is curious, because you can raise bees now in the city of Marquette. You're allowed. Yeah. Before, people just did it on the down low, like they would do it, but and we all kind of knew they were doing it, but technically you weren't supposed to. So and that is something to look into wherever you end up next. You should look at the town or city laws to see if that's something you might be interested in getting involved in, because that's one of their pushes, is if we can get more people doing bee raising, that's definitely going to help this situation. And it can be, it's a lot of fun from what I hear. I haven't delved into that yet, but I'm seriously thinking about it. And it sounds like a lot of fun and would be doing something very worthwhile. So there are, people that are in the more mainstream that are, I think, he is like a fungal guru. He owns his own company called Fungi Imperfecti, I think. No, Fungi. Okay. And he's been really pushing because he thinks that there are fungi that he has by control. He's an expert with fungi. And so here's a promotional video clip where they allow themselves to be covered in bees, and to make the point that we need to get into this research and really start solving this problem if we want food at the end of our growing season. And when so much of our food is reliant on honeybees, it's kind of scary what could happen. So we got to figure this out, and we got to help. So, and so they're kind of doing that citizen science type thing where they're like, you can get involved, you can start, raising your own bee colonies, getting involved in that to help support the population, the declining population. So he's actually working on, I'll show you a picture of it in a second, but basically from their website, he is saying there's like this, they call it Give Bees a Chance program. Fungi Perfecti is getting involved. And so he's been dumping, donating money toward this effort. And the reason he's gotten so fired up about it is some of the fungi that he's been working with, he shows can really help with helping the bees. And the fungi are like biocontrol agents that are effective against what's attacking the bees. And so if you want to learn more, I think that YouTube video or address is still viable, but here, this is kind of what he's coming up with, where we can hang, almost looks like a bird feeder, but it's allowing the bees to come in and get fed, like kind of like hummingbird feeder idea. And then, but it is a mushroom extract mixed in. So he's saying that if the bees incorporate that into their diet, that it boosts their immune system. And his website, if you go to his business website, he does that for humans too, where he has all kinds of extracts and things that people can buy with the idea that it boosts your immune system. So something to consider. Certainly, in some of the initial research that he did, it was showing really promising results. Like the bees were much healthier, much more capable of withstanding attack by these pathogens. So I think they're onto something, and I think fungi would be a really good route. Fungi have incredible medicinal properties, and so I think this is a promising route. I'm hoping that they're going to make progress, because what the plan is that they would sell this out to people, put it in your yard, so that the bees could come get this drink of this, mushroom elixir that would help them. And that would be really simple for us, it's just paying a little hummingbird-like feeder. And so it's something to consider. So keep your ear and eyes out for that. And maybe consider getting into bee raising if that's something that you could eventually do when you get your own place. Okay. So beetles also, like even back with the gymnosperms, beetles seem to be playing a role in pollination in some gymnosperm species and certainly with angiosperms, but they're a little different in terms of what they are attracted to. So the flowers, the plants that co-evolve with beetle pollinators, they're going to be producing a little bit more what we would consider yeast type smells, not the sweet, like you see with bee pollination. And spicy beetles don't have the greatest eyesight compared to bees, so the colors aren't usually overly flashy, but they usually have a really strong smell. Not distasteful necessarily. It's not really, at least the ones I've smelled, I don't find them distasteful, but they're usually pretty pungent. And of course, for the beetle, that's, they can hone in on that and follow that scent until they reach the flower. And so, and then butterflies, we have those type of organisms that, so if you think about butterflies, and then they usually include into this group the day active moths, not the nocturnal ones, but the day active. So they kind of see along the same visual acuity, and except they can also perceive red, how we perceive red. And so they can be attracted to red flowers. The mouth parts on moths are much longer than bee mouth parts, and they often have a proboscis mouth part, which is long and skinny, and it helps them get down deep into the lower reaches of a flower. And so often flower design has more trumpet shaped, where you can see there's a little bit of fusion or a corolla, so that the nectar is deep down. And so look for that kind of flower design when you're out this summer walking around. And their mouth part is definitely different compared to bees. And that plays a big role on how the flower designs its shape so that the butterfly gets the reward and not some other insect. And so they usually put the nectar deeper down. And so, here's a really good picture that gets at that. So you can see, with the fusion here and that almost, they call it like trumpet shaped. And so the nectar would be deeper down in here where the proboscis can reach. And that way it makes it very specialized, like only the moths can do this, not some random beetle or something like that that might be crawling around. Okay, and then there's so I think you've had some experience maybe when you went into the greenhouse with the snake plant that we have. We have several snake plants. It's also called mother-in-law's tongue plant. That one, I have several of those at home, and it finally got sexually mature and sprouted some flowers. And I wasn't paying that much attention, and the flowers were kind of tucked in between the leaves, so I didn't notice it for a while, but I kept at night, I'm like, what's that smell? What's that smell? It was the snake plant flower. And so it only gives off the smell at night. So I didn't look it up at the time, but I'm guessing that the snake plant probably gets pollinated by something at night, because the scent would go out at night. They're white flowers. And then during the day, nothing, no scent. And so nocturnal pollination, again, if it's pitch black out, it makes sense that you have bright white, off-white flowers to stand out against that black background of the night. And so nocturnal moths, you have beetles coming out at night, flies coming out, bats, some very important crop plants, mangoes. And so putting out your scent at night, but then not wasting your energy. Don't do it all day, because you're not trying to attract day pollinators, so only do it at night. And so the timing of when scents are given off can be revealing of when they actually are looking for their pollinators. So they don't usually do red or purple flowers, they usually white. And so again, white is a pretty good idea that it's going to be nocturnal. And then they often pump out a pretty potent scent that you can pick up. Like I said, my whole house, I could smell, like, what is that smell? And it smells good. Your snake plant does bloom. Nice scent. It does smell nice, but it's very strong. So, and mine took years to sexually mature, so you might have to be really patient, but they will bloom eventually. And so here, the cactus flower that a lot of the desert plants will bloom at night. And so again, thinking about nocturnal organisms, bats are a big one. Now, I know a lot of people are freaked out by bats. There's been, unfortunately, a lot of Hollywood movies that really make bats seem evil. But I'm hoping you, when you're out in your real life, talking to people that don't know much biology, that you tell them bats are incredibly important. Just from what they can do agriculturally for us, they're really, really important at pollinating some really important crops. Not so much here in the Midwest, but tropical regions, they rely heavily on bats for pollination of crop plants. So they're not evil. They're very useful and very interesting organisms. Again, that bright color, lots of scent. Here's a really nice picture of a bat coming to visit. Yeah. When I was in Texas for a conference, they had that famous, it was near Austin. Apparently there's that area where, they sleep all day and then you can go and stand there, and at dusk they all come flying out. Has anyone seen that in the Austin area? It was really impressive. I mean, the more you learn about bats, the more impressive they are. And so I just get really fed up with all the Hollywood movies that make them seem so evil. So really, really important and interesting organisms. Okay, and then birds, of course, birds play a role in pollination for sure. And a lot, you need to look at their beak design and think about that with regard to what flowers they might want to visit that would make them successful. And so around here, we do have a lot of hummingbirds, believe it or not. If you put out a hummingbird feeder, they will come. I was stunned myself. I was a little not optimistic that in town they'd find a bird feeder. But I put a hummingbird feeder, and within a half hour, boom, they were there. And they regularly visit it. They have it all mapped out where they go to, probably all the hummingbird feeders in the city. And so, and not to put food coloring. Don't put food coloring into the liquid that feed off of that. Food coloring is not good for them. If you buy a hummingbird feeder, there's enough red and yellow on it that they will be attracted to it. You don't need to put food coloring in there. And so hummingbirds, honey creepers are more tropical, but they definitely look at their beak design, and then the flowers, you can see often they're trumpet shaped again. They, have some depth to them where they put the nectar. Apparently, they've done some studies where they think birds don't have a great sense of smell. I think that's still accurate. I've heard it otherwise. And so again, those flowers, like if you take a deep sniff of those flowers, you won't really pick up on it. And so that's another tip off that it's probably, especially if they're shaped where you can imagine a longer beak, having to reach in there to get access to nectar. Now, depending on the species of bird, the beak shapes vary quite a bit. And so you do have some good variation in flower design, but usually you do have some kind of recessed part of the flower where they'll tuck away the nectar. This next one is a really good one. Look at that. They're just so amazing. If you do put up a hummingbird feeder, and if you just patiently sit there and watch them, it's just amazing that they, the rate at their wing flap, the speed of that, it's just incredible. And then if you sit there often enough and quiet enough, they don't hear you. They'll come around you. I've been like right next to the feeder. As long as you're still, they'll come right there. Okay. Oh, so yeah, yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, that'd be free entertainment for sure. Yeah, they're really fun to watch. So you can imagine, and I'm sure you've all seen at least video of hummingbirds and appreciate their rapid wing beat. So they need a lot of energy. to make it through the day. And so usually these flowers will provide a lot of nectar to make the reward worth it for them to come visit. And so if you look at, like, they've done studies on, this is a bee pollinated flower, this is a hummingbird, and you look at that, there's definite differences in nectar amount because bees don't need as much energy compared to hummingbirds. And then you also have to think about, if you are a plant, you don't want to, like, say you're a bee pollinated plant. You don't want to put so much nectar in a flower that the bee comes to that one flower, gets a bunch of nectar to the point where it's like, oh, I'm full, I'm sleepy, I'm going to go back to the hive. You know, you want it to move on. And so they've done some really cool, careful studies where they, you know, actually look at the caloric amount of the nectar, and they can show that the plant is providing enough nectar to reward them, but not enough for them to want to just go back to the hive and keep on. And so, and then when they look at hummingbirds, they definitely ramp up the amount of nectar. But again, you don't want the hummingbird to get full on that flower, because the goal is, yes, come visit this flower, get a little bit of reward, but in the process, get some pollen. So you'll go on to the next flower for another reward and deposit. So really tight coevolution is going on between the plant and its pollinator to make sure that, yeah, I want to reward you, but I want you keeping so that you'll pass and pollinate my, you know, my other partner over there somewhere where they have the flower ready to go. So here's another really good example where you can see that long kind of trumpet shape to the flower where the beaks can reach in and get access to the nectar. Bird of paradise, of course, really incredible design to that flower in tropical regions. And you have a more stout bird that actually perches on it. So that's the other thing too. If it's a perching bird, the flowers will compensate by making sure that their stalk or flower parts are strong for the perching bird. Hummingbirds don't tend to perch, they tend to hover when they get their nectar, so they don't usually have to worry about, you know, the flower design doesn't have to be so sturdy. So lots and lots of different variations, but again, if you think about it through the idea of coevolution, like, what is this plant trying to accomplish? Who is it trying to attract? And once you start thinking about that this summer, when you're out and about smelling flowers, hopefully you'll get a chance to go and smell the flowers quite a bit this summer. Really start thinking about that. You know, smell it, look at it, maybe sit and watch to see if there's any pollinators coming by while you're there. And it's really fun to start looking at the flowers a little bit more critically with this information in mind, and start to really appreciate these different plants and how they strategize to get the job done. Here we're looking at the Protea species. I think maybe in one of Sir David Attenborough's movies, he talks a little bit more about this one. This is an inflorescence, so this is actually many, many, many flowers all put together to look like one giant flower. Really, really impressive. And then they have seen, in this case, birds will come to this flower. So this is a pretty rare sighting. And then, oh, and then don't forget, there are some like little mice, especially in desert regions. Mice are often a good candidate for pollinating, you know, the coevolution between the plant and the pollinator. And so you tend to think about different rodents, you know, even like lizards and things like that can be involved in pollination. And so when you look at a lot of these, again, it's that spicy smell, it's going to be pretty pungent. If it's for a mammal that's crawling around like on the desert floor, they often show the flowers are close to the ground. Often they're pointing down, not up, so that the mouse can get access, really easy access. So again, you know, there's a lot of variation depending on who the pollinator is, and is it daytime pollination, nighttime pollination? And so that coevolution, those forces of how they act on each other over evolutionary time, creates this wonderful pairing between the plant and its pollinator. So we have one of these flowers in the green, or plant, the carrion plant. So that one on the left, that's the flower that it produces. It just bloomed last semester. and big blooms. I mean, the blooms are almost a foot across, and the plant is pretty modest. It's just a medium-sized small pot. The plant itself is big. Shoots out is huge, and the flower bud is massive. It's like about the size of a mango before it opens, and then it opens like that. And luckily, at least this one in the greenhouse, it doesn't stink up the whole greenhouse. But if you go walk up to it, like I went up to it with a sniff, and it's definitely like decaying flesh. It smells like dead flesh, like something died and is slowly rotting. So it's not pleasant to our nose, but they call it the carrion plant because it's mimicking dead flesh. So you can imagine flies are definitely attracted to that, and that is their pollen. They rely on flies. And so really interesting. And then I think in one of the Sir David Attenborough, he talks about the design of the flower petals are supposed to look like decaying flesh. And so it's bizarre. Right? So yeah, I know. It's the coevolution. It's the idea of the fly visits in this coevolutionary process. Yeah, I know. It's kind of mind blowing. Like the white flowers. Yeah, it's all through this coevolutionary interaction, and it was probably took it probably took trial and error, and then this fine tuning to have a really close tight harmony. So, but I think in maybe the one that they asked you to see today, it's about pollination strategies. I think they'll bring up this one, and I think or a species similar to this, and I think it was on like a cliff face where there's a lot of seagulls. And when seagulls die and they start decaying, their bodies kind of look like that. And so they're even mimicking what the closest carrion looks like. And it's mind-boggling. And again, it's just all this coevolutionary interaction going on that leads to the, in this case, a very pungent dead flesh smell. So and then some greenhouses have the so-called corpse flower. My good friend from grad school she just retired, but she worked at Grand Valley, and they had one that was in the greenhouse. Again, this is like as tall as a person, and can give off a very pungent smell. I wouldn't want to be working in this greenhouse long term, or maybe put some essential oil under your nose. This one is definitely greenhouse, and it's not pleasant to our noses. So, but yeah, really impressive. You know, you can get, depending on the plant species, flowers that are teeny tiny to these massive inflorescences that are really, really impressive. So plants are amazing. Okay, so the last several sets of slides here, it's talking a lot about orchid pollination strategies. And so there's a lot of text on here that I think is good. Like, I'm not going to go into it right now, but you can use it as part of your study tool. So here you're looking at, again, at a orchid flower design, and then they start getting into like, this is how this one works, and this is how it, attracts a pollinator. The Sir David Attenborough movie will talk quite a bit about this stuff. So it's backing up, the video's backing up a lot of what's being said in these slides. So use these as study guides, because you'll probably, especially in the lab, you'll probably be asked to describe some kind of special coevolutionary pollination strategy. I'm guessing that they might ask something like that. And I'll probably design some multiple choice questions asking you about pollination strategy, like, if you're trying to attract a bee, what would you look like? Or I might flip it and say, well, flip it. And so think about these ideas. What makes a flower a bee would want to come to versus what makes, what would a bat be interested in? So think about these ideas. I'll have that in my portion of the final exam too. But they're fun to think about. It's usually, most students do really well with this. You just spend a little bit of time thinking through this and think like a pollinator, and I think you'll be able to get it. So orchids are kind of deceptive. Many orchids deceive their pollinators, and they get away with it. And the pollinators never, at least so far, they don't seem to learn their lesson. They keep coming back and get fooled. So he'll talk about that in that video. So the last several slides are getting into that. I mean, even look at this, the wasp orchid, where the body, the flower design looks like a female wasp. And it even pumps out the pheromone a female wasp makes when it's ready to mate. I mean, how crazy is that? So here they're showing the top left is what the flower looks like, the orchid flower, and then they show the male coming and trying to have sex. And of course, he's totally duped. There is no female there, but it looks like a female, it smells like a female, but oh, sorry, no female. So it totally dupes, and they don't learn. At least not so far. Maybe in 100 years, I will have to think of something new. But yeah, just stunning what the orchids have come up with in terms of, many of them do dupe their pollinators. There is no reward. So it'll be interesting. I'd like to be able to jump forward in time and see if that is going to shift at any point. Like, will those wasps ever figure it out? I don't know. Bucket orchids are fun because they kind of make the pollinator dump into a bucket. And then when they escape, they get pollen stuck on their back through the escape door. It's just incredibly ornate, tricky mechanisms. So orchids are fascinating. Okay, but I wanted to get into a little bit of fruit design. Thursday's lab, you're going to learn about fruits and dissect some fruits. And we'll talk about some of the big picture ideas about fruit design. So let me get into that now, because I'm really trying to save a lot of Thursday's lecture for just question and answers for the exam. Let me get into, do I have that up in EduCat, the second flower and fruit? Is that there? Okay. So the second slide set, flower and fruits, part 2, that's what I'm getting into right now. And okay, let me share. So you will be expected to know the anatomy of a fruit. So this one is really good to study off of. So this is kind of getting at what you're seeing here is a fleshy fruit. Looks like a peach, maybe. And so when you look at a fleshy fruit, like a peach or an orange or an apple, there's distinct regions. The outside region is called the exocarp. That's the skin, so to speak, of the fruit. Then the middle fleshy part is the meso for middle. And then endo is within, that's the deepest part, the most innermost part. The endocarp usually is the part that's immediately surrounding whatever seed is there. Now this pericarp idea, I want you to know that too. So in a dry fruit, we're going to talk about dry fruits too, which is kind of weird, but we'll get into it. In a dry fruit, like peas in a pod, that's a dry fruit. The pod is what we call a pericarp. So the pod is the exocarp, mesocarp, and endocarp, all greatly reduced and thinned out into what we call a pericarp. So when we talk about dry fruits, we use the term pericarp. When we talk about fleshy fruits, then we use the region, exocarp, mesocarp, endocarp. Okay? So when we're thinking about fruits, remember now, a fruit by definition came from a pollinated flower. Right? Pollination and fertilization can happen as well. I'll talk about an exception. In order to get that fruit to start to develop. So what happens is after double fertilization, where sperm fuses with the egg, the second sperm fuses with the polar nuclei to make the endosperm. Got all that going on. Well, as the embryo, the baby plant in there, the embryos start to grow and develop. You get the seed being made, but then you also get the fruit around all of that getting. And that can come from the ovary tissue. The ovary tissue plays a huge role in fruit development. Sometimes the receptacle right below the ovary also plays a big role. It depends on the fruit. Okay. And so when we look at fruits and how, all the variety of fruits, we say the first thing you ask is it fleshy or is it dry? That's like the first thing. And so fleshy, that means you have, a definite exo, meso, endocarp. It's fleshy, like orange and peach, plums. Dry, on the other hand, you have a pericarp idea where it's all thinned out and fused together, not much to look at. Think peas in a pod. And then they dry out at maturity. They're not fleshy and juicy, okay? Then another thing they look at, classify, is they say, especially like with the dry fruits, do they split open at maturity? So some pods, for example, they will split open and release out the seeds. Some pods won't. They'll stay closed, and you are the one that, if you want the seeds inside, you have to peel open the peas and get them out. And so they look at that, and then they look at how many ovaries were involved to get this fruit formed. What did that take? And so they look at, is it one ovary or is it multiple ovaries? So hang on to that thought. And then, so a flower could have one ovary. That's typical. Inflorescences, on the other hand, because there are many, many flowers all clustered together, you can have many ovaries really close to each other. And so you can get multiple ovaries involved in the fruit. So we have to think about that. And then, are there other parts of the flower besides the ovary that's helping making that fruit? And so a fruit, by definition, equals a mature ovary plus or minus additional flower. That's really kind of the definition. What is a fruit? It's the ovary of the flower that has matured and evolved and grown into this fruit. And then sometimes there's other flower parts that are involved as well. So if we say, oh, that's a simple fruit, then what that means is it's just kind of straight ahead. One ovary that started to morph into the fruit tissue. Cherries are a really good example of that. Simple fruit. If we say, oh, that's an aggregate fruit, what that means is that you have a single flower, but it's a flower that has actually several ovaries in that one flower. And so then we say it's an aggregate, an aggregation of ovaries within that flower give rise to an aggregate fruit. So a good example of that is blackberry. If you ever go blackberry picking, that's what you're getting. And then try to keep these straight. The multiple fruit means multiple flowers, okay? So you get ovaries from multiple flowers that are clustered. And that will give you that type of multiple fruit. So pineapple is a great example. Pineapple flowers are an inflorescence, kind of on a tall vertical growth pattern. So pineapples are multiple fruit, clusters of ovaries from clusters of flowers. And then, oh yeah, corn. Corn's an excellent example of that too. So each kernel that you bite into is a fruit. It's a dry fruit, right? So you're eating pericarp tissue when you munch on those corn kernels. So each kernel is a fruit, which seems weird because I'm sure your parents said, eat your corn, eat your vegetables. But so many of what people say, oh, that's a vegetable, no. In the botany realm, no, it's a fruit. What would be a true vegetable, by the way? Yes, something coming from the root. Potato, carrot, sweet potato. Those are true vegetables. But anything that came through a pollination, fertilization event, with a flower involved, that's a fruit. Tomato is a fruit. Yes. They are kind of seedless. You can see like remnants of the seeds if you look closely on some bananas, but they're seedless. And they clone them when they grow them in plantations. Banana trees kind of sprout up rhizomes, and so it's just like cloning. They rarely go through sexual reproduction. No, we still say it's a fruit. All right, we'll finish this up on Thursday. There's a few more things to say. We'll do a review section for the final exam on Thursday.